a mesmerizing fantastical horror comedy which has lost none of its appeal. It's the gift that keeps on giving, with repeat viewings only unfurling more neat details you almost certainly missed the first time around. And to that end, here are 20 things you've almost certainly never noticed in Beetlejuice, from unexpected cameos to incredible sight gags, hilarious Easter eggs, and deeply macabre inside jokes on the part of Tim Burton and his crew. So let's dive in. I'm Adam, this is What Culture, and here are 20 things you somehow missed in Beetlejuice. Number 20. Jack Skellington's cameo. Much as Beetlejuice informs the aesthetic that would define much of Tim Burton's subsequent career, it also nods towards one of his most iconic future projects. Near the end of the movie, when Beetlejuice transforms into the terrifying-looking carnival monstrosity, keep an eye on what can be fleetingly seen on the top of his head. It's a very distinctive-looking skeleton, one which bears an uncanny resemblance to Jack Skellington, the protagonist of the Burton-conceived, Henry Selick-directed 1993 stop-motion animated classic The Nightmare Before Christmas. Burton had apparently been drawn this skeletal figure for years prior to The Nightmare Before Christmas finally entering production, and so eagle-eyed fans can catch a proto-Jack hanging around the top of Beetlejuice's head. Number 19. Delia wears Charles's sweater as pants while cooking. Early in the film, we see Charles Dietz wearing a distinctive red seasonal sweater, yet it ends up making a surprise reappearance a little later when his wife Delia is preparing the dinner party. Delia isn't merely wearing similar red Yuletide-themed trousers, she's literally taken Charles's very same sweater and turned it into trousers. Given that Delia is a self-centered artist and has a habit of criticizing her husband, it's fair to assume that she wasn't much of a fan of him wearing the sweater and so, as a creator, decided to turn it into something new. Number 18. The iconic bumper sticker on the Maitland's car. As Barbara and Adam Maitland have their fateful car accident at the start of the movie, take a peek at their car's bumper sticker once the vehicle hits the water. The sticker reads, "I brake for animals," a rather ironic declaration given that the accident is in fact caused by the duo swerving out of the way of a dog rather than slamming on the brakes. Granted, hitting the brakes would have probably had a not so great outcome for the dog, so you can appreciate why they swerved instead, even if it ultimately resulted in their deaths. Number 17. Miss Argentina became a receptionist because she slit her wrists. The Maitlands end up traveling to the Afterlife waiting room, where they're greeted by the receptionist, Miss Argentina. Miss Argentina tells the couple about the very personal nature of a deceased individual's afterlife, before saying, "If I knew then what I know now, I wouldn't have had my little accident." Argentina then holds her wrists up, basically confirming that she committed suicide by slitting her wrists. This is important given that a little later on in the film, interior designer Otho knowingly says, "You know what they say about people who commit suicide? In the afterlife, they become civil servants." Basically, Miss Argentina ended up stuck as a receptionist because she killed herself, and that's probably what would have prevented her from doing so had she known beforehand. Number 16. Barbara's wrapping paper has Beatles on it. In one of Beetlejuice's opening scenes, Adam and Barbara exchange vacation gifts as they go about decorating their country home. And if you look extremely closely at the wrapping paper on Barbara's present from Adam, it's got Beatles on it. Very subtle there, Burton. This is presumably nothing more than a cute little flourish on the part of the movie's production design team. But given that it was incredibly tough to spot on prior lower definition releases of the film, it's neat to catch it in all of its ultra high definition 4K glory. You'll need to keep your eyes peeled though, because it's only on screen for a second or two. Number 15. The legs belong to Tim Burton's girlfriend. Now, to be fair, there's absolutely no way for you to know this factoid, but it's fascinating enough that it merits inclusion on this list regardless, so there you go. At the very end of the movie, Beetlejuice attempts to lift up the skirt of the magician's assistant who he sawed in half, all while he's stuck in the afterlife waiting room. As it turns out, the pair of legs actually belonged to Tim Burton's girlfriend at the time, though accounts vary on precisely who Burton was romantically involved with when the film was shooting in the early to mid 1987. All the same, it's a fun fact for sure. Number 14. It's a rare PG movie with an F-bomb. Something that's easy to forget about the movie, especially if you haven't seen it in a good while, is just how much it gets away with for a PG film. Beyond the fantastical violence and sexually suggestive themes and innuendo, Beetlejuice literally drops an uncensored F-bomb at one point, when he kicks over a model tree and shouts, "Nice fucking motel." It's all the more surprising given that the PG-13 rating was introduced almost 4 years prior to Beetlejuice's release, and yet the MPAA of this era decided a single F-bomb adequate for younger audiences. Some fans maintain that the movie actually features 2 utterances of the word, though the second one, when Beetlejuice falls off the balcony near the end, is obscured enough that it's tough to fully discern. Between this and the word shit also being heard once, it's frankly shocking that this thing didn't get slapped with a PG-13, but back then, things were different. In some ways better, or worse no less. Number 13. The dog that causes the Maitland's accident can be seen crossing the road earlier. Now here's something that can be easily spotted on repeat viewings once you know what to look for, but on an initial watch it's impossible to appreciate the significance of. As we all know, the Maitlands fatally crashed their car while swerving to avoid a dog, but the dog can actually be seen briefly about a minute prior to their unfortunate encounter with him. After they drive through the red covered bridge on their way to the hardware store, the dog can be seen crossing the street as the Maitlands say a quick hello to the local groundskeeper, Ernie, blissfully unaware that Ernie's dog will cause their deaths mere minutes later. Number 12. Spray paint from a previous take is visible on the wall. Though modern HD re-releases of classic movies can be fantastic, it can also reveal glaring mistakes the filmmakers never expected to be seen. Case in point, early in the film, Delia goes upstairs in her new home and spray paints the word mauve on one of the walls, planning to repaint it to her liking. However, look closely and you can see faded spray paint already on the wall, presumably because this wasn't the first take of the scene and the paint couldn't be completely scrubbed off. At the time of the film's release, it was likely assumed that this would never be noticeable, and yet, with Beetlejuice now available in 4K, it's relatively easy to spot, as the production designer probably hides their face with a single hand. Number 11. Michael Keaton has only 17 minutes of screen time. Michael Keaton has such a larger-than-life presence throughout the film that it's easy to assume he has a huge bulk of screen time, but would you believe that he's actually only in Beetlejuice for around 17 minutes? To be clear, that's less than 20% of the movie's 92-minute runtime, and beyond that, he doesn't show up until almost a full half hour into the story. And yet, Keaton makes such a strong impression that it seems like he's in the film so much more than that, with the audience left thinking about him even when he's nowhere to be seen. Number 10. A real crashed flight is announced as a new arrival in Juno's office. If you managed to catch this small Easter egg, then well done you absolute legend. When the Maitlands enter the Afterlife waiting room, a voice on the loudspeaker can be heard saying, "Flight 409 is arriving at gate 3. This isn't random, however. It's a reference to United Airlines Flight 409, which crashed in Wyoming on October 6, 1955, killing all 66 passengers and crew on board. Furthermore, it was the deadliest airline crash in the history of American commercial aviation at the time." Yeah, that's pretty damn dark to include, even for Tim Burton. Number 9. Adamstown model includes the hole where they crashed their car. If it somehow isn't abundantly clear by now, Beetlejuice's production is a treasure trove of brilliant little details, and one of the best. Shortly after the Maitlands perish and return to their home, take a look at Adam's miniature model of the town. The red-covered bridge which they crash through now has a hole in it, suggesting that Adam was so committed to detail that he even updated it in the wake of their deaths. And yet, it's a minor enough detail that you couldn't be blamed for missing it, no matter how many times you've seen Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice. Number 8. The significance of the number 3. Now everybody knows that Beetlejuice is summoned by saying his name 3 times, but the number 3 is actually repeatedly shown to be significant throughout the entire movie. Early on, Delia mentions that one of her 4 sculptures has been lost during the moving in process, leaving behind 3. Adam has to knock 3 times in order to enter the waiting room. Miss Argentina tells the Maitlands that they'll only get 3 D90 health vouchers. Juno tells them they were kept waiting for her for 3 months. Barbara says home 3 times to return home, and the aforementioned Flight 409 arrives at gate 3. Basically, that damn number is everywhere. Number 7. The Maitlands' wedding photo is still in Charles's office. Early in the film, Charles lashes out at Delia and Otho to not touch anything in his office, insisting that they can remodel the rest of the house, but not this room. And hilariously, later on we see that Delia and Otho absolutely took Charles at his word, as once the family has fully moved in and renovated the home, one of the Maitlands' wedding photos is still displayed in Charles's office on the bookcase behind him. Did he just like the photo? More likely he overlooked and forgot about it. Either way, a fun detail most surely missed. Number 6. Beetlejuice is literally horny at the strip club. Midway through the movie, Beetlejuice ends up at Dante's Inferno room, which, let's call it what it is a strip club, because he's clearly one hell of a horny bioexorcist. And if that's not made plainly clear enough, moments before this we see Beetlejuice sprout spikes, thorns, or horns if you like, which continue to protrude from his body as he dances around with the establishment's scantily clad women. That Beetlejuice first sprouts the horns after Barbara picks him up is probably pretty telling too, to be honest. In the very least, this is a visual gag kids haven't got a hope in hell of picking up on, let alone most adults apparently. Number 5. What Lydia's red wedding dress represents. Like any Tim Burton movie, Beetlejuice has some absolutely wild costume designs, and perhaps the most memorable of the lot is Lydia's striking red dress when she agrees to marry Beetlejuice in exchange for his help. The dress wasn't merely chosen for its clashy nature though, it's actually informed by an age-old superstition which dictates, married in red, you'll wish yourself dead. After all, this isn't exactly an enthusiastic wedding for Lydia, and given that she's seen writing a suicide note a few scenes earlier in the movie, it's hardly a reach that she might wish herself dead after going through with this. Number 4. Delia was written about in Art in America. While Delia is prepping the dinner party, she tells Lydia, "My agent Bernard is bringing a woman who writes for Art in America." A seemingly throwaway line which nevertheless gets a deliciously subtle payoff right at film's end. Look closely in one of the film's final scenes and you'll see that Delia has a copy of an issue of Art in America displayed, where she is featured on the front cover along with the sculptures which came to life and attacked her and Charles. Better yet, the headline on the cover, Images of the Afterlife. That's foreshadowing for you. Number 3. The true meaning of the no exit sign. In the Afterlife waiting room, you might have noticed a sign that reads no exit and assumed it was a mildly amusing take on the typical exit sign you'd expect to see in just about any public building. But it goes deeper and smarter than that. This is actually a nod to the 1944 existentialist play of the same name written by legendary French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre. More to the point, the play itself revolves around 3 dead individuals who are punished by being locked into a room together forevermore. Evidently, either Burton, the screenwriters, or production design team were big fans of it. Number 2. There's a ghost audience watching you. When Adam and Barbara enter Juno's office in the afterlife, look at the window behind the Maitlands and you'll notice a group of eccentric-looking folk sat down. At first glance, you might assume they're simply fellow afterlifers waiting for their own appointments in the waiting room, but that's not actually the case. After all, it's clear that the seating arrangement is tiered, as it truly would never be in a waiting room, but certainly in a theatre. As such, it's safe to assume that this is basically a ghostly audience who are watching us, the real audience. Decades before meta Easter eggs were cool, here's Beetlejuice being even weirder than you thought possible. Number 1. Juno's watch alarm chime is Chopin's Funeral March. And finally, if Juno's watch alarm sounds a little familiar to you, that's because it's yet another macabre in-joke from the mind of Tim Burton and his team. The alarm is actually a chimed rendition of one of the most famous pieces of classical music in the world, Chopin's Funeral March, the 3rd movement in his Sonata No. 2 in B-flat minor to be precise. You might have recognized the tune, but knowing that it's a funeral march just adds another darkly comedic layer to it all, especially given that it's on the watch of Juno of all people, the Maitland's caseworker in the afterlife.